He signed the ledger. The existence tax was discipline, not cruelty. You can't erase what I'm owed.
I have been sitting on this bench for over 2 decades, and if there is one thing I believed to be an immutable law of nature, it is a mother's love. In my courtroom, no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how overwhelming the evidence, there is almost always a mother in the back row. She will weep, she will beg for leniency, she will tell me her son is a good boy who just lost his way. That is instinct. That is the final line of defense. But the case that walked into my courtroom on that Tuesday morning shattered every rule I thought I knew. It sent a chill down my spine from the very first moment. The case file in front of me read, Case number 8821C. The defendant was Leo Vance, 19 years old. The charge, grand larceny. The victim, and the star witness testifying against him, was none other than his own mother, Mrs. Elena Vance. When she walked in, the air in the courtroom seemed to vanish. Elena did not look like a mother grieving for a wayward child. She looked like an ice queen descending to punish a rebellious subject. She wore a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, a cold navy blue, and around her neck hung a string of pearls that I estimated could feed a family of 4 for 3 years. She did not look at her son, not even once. In stark contrast, Leo Vance looked like a ghost. The 9-year-old was emaciated, wearing an old, frayed gray hoodie that was so oversized it seemed to be swallowing his small frame whole. The sneakers on his feet were torn, the soles flapping, and he kept his eyes glued to the floor, his hands clasped so tightly together that his knuckles were bone white. The contrast between mother and son was blinding. The mother radiated money and power. The son radiated desperation and hunger. Literally, from where I sat, I could see the sharp protrusion of his cheekbones. The prosecutor, Mr. Harrison, began reading the charges. Your Honor, the defendant, Leo Vance, is charged with stealing a Rolex watch valued at $25,000 and a pair of diamond earrings from a safe in Mrs. Elena Vance's master bedroom on October 10th. The defendant was captured on home security cameras exiting the master suite. Harrison spoke with a steady voice, but I could see even he was uncomfortable. Usually, domestic thefts of this nature are settled quietly at home or through mediation, but not this time. When it was the defense attorney's turn to speak, Elena Vance did something that stunned the entire courtroom. She didn't wait to be called. She stood up abruptly, her eyes slicing through the air directly at me. There was no trembling, no tears. Her voice rang out, cold and hard as a gavel striking stone. Judge Boyd, she said, cutting off the lawyer, I do not want to hear any excuses about circumstances or leniency. I am here to ensure justice is served. This boy, she pointed a manicured finger at Leo as if he were a bag of trash, is a rotten seed. He stole from his own mother. I want him locked up. I want the maximum sentence. The courtroom fell into a dead silence. I looked at Leo. He physically flinched at his mother's words, shrinking into himself as if every syllable was a physical blow. He didn't fight back. He didn't look up to plead his innocence. He just shook violently. And in that moment, I realized something was terribly wrong. Usually, a rebellious, addicted child who steals from their parents displays arrogance or aggression. But Leo, he looked terrified. And he wasn't afraid of prison. He was terrified of the woman standing 10 feet away from him. I adjusted my glasses and looked straight at Elena Vance. Mrs. Vance, I said, my voice dropping an octave, do you understand what you are asking for? You are asking me to send your biological son to federal prison. Once I strike this gavel, his future will be stained permanently. Is that truly what you want? Elena lifted her chin, her expression arrogant to the point of cruelty. He needs to learn a lesson, Your Honor. I gave him everything, a roof, food, clothes, and this is how he repays me. He is an ungrateful wretch. Lock him up so he learns what real suffering is. Suffering? I asked myself internally. I looked back at Leo's tattered clothes and compared them to Elena's designer suit. There was a massive contradiction here. If she gave him everything, why did he look like a homeless man dragged in from under a bridge? Why would the son of a wealthy family be wearing shoes with holes in them? The intuition of a judge with 40 years in the game told me that this stolen Rolex was just the tip of a much darker iceberg. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing. I was not going to let this trial follow that woman's script. The public defender assigned to Leo was a man named Mr. Sterling. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from handling 300 cases a month with a budget of zero. He stood up slowly, adjusting his cheap tie, and looked at me with eyes that pleaded for understanding. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice quiet. My client intends to plead guilty. He just wants to get this over with. He accepts the consequences. Elena Vance nodded sharply from the gallery, a satisfied smirk touching her red lips. See, she said, loud enough for the stenographer to catch. Even he knows he's guilty. Just sentence him. I ignored her. I looked at Mr. Sterling, then at Leo. A 19-year-old boy who accepts a felony charge without a fight, without a single word in his own defense? That doesn't happen. Not unless they have been broken. Not unless they believe they have no other choice. I leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate your motion, but before I accept any plea, I want to see the evidence. Prosecutor, play the security tape. Harrison set up the monitor. The courtroom darkened. On the screen, the grainy black and white footage of a master bedroom appeared. The timestamp read, October 10th, 2:14 p.m. We watched as the door creaked open. Leo walked in. But he didn't prowl like a thief. He didn't look around nervously for cameras. He didn't rummage through drawers looking for the most expensive items. He moved like a sleepwalker. He moved with a heaviness that I could feel through the screen. He walked straight to the safe. He typed in the code without hesitation and opened it. He took the Rolex. He took the earrings. But then I saw something that made me hit the pause button immediately. Stop, I ordered. Rewind 5 seconds. Play it again. We watched it again. On the dresser, right next to the safe, was a stack of cash. It looked like at least $2,000 in hundreds. Loose bills, easy to grab, untraceable. Leo had walked right past it. He had actually brushed against it with his sleeve as he reached for the safe. He didn't touch it. He took the jewelry, which would be incredibly hard to pawn without getting caught, and left the cash, which was instant food and shelter. Turn on the lights, I said. The room brightened, revealing the confused faces of the attorneys. I took off my glasses and pointed them at the prosecutor. Mr. Harrison, you are telling me this boy is a greedy, out-of-control thief who steals to support a lavish lifestyle or a drug habit? Then explain to me why he left $2,000 in cash sitting on the table and stole a watch that requires a certificate of authenticity to sell? Elena stood up again. Because he's stupid, Your Honor. I told you he's useless. He probably didn't see it. He brushed against it. Mrs. Vance, I shot back, my patience wearing thin. He saw it. Thieves don't leave cash. They just don't, unless... I let the word hang in the air. Unless they aren't stealing for money. Unless they are stealing because they are following a script. I turned my attention to Leo. He was still looking at the floor, his body trembling even harder now. Leo, I said, look at me, son. He didn't move. Leo Vance, I said, putting a little more steel in my voice. In my courtroom, when I speak to you, you look at me. Lift your head. Slowly, painfully slowly, Leo raised his head. When I saw his face clearly for the first time, I felt a physical blow to my chest. Up close, the situation was far worse than I had realized. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull, surrounded by dark, purple bruises of exhaustion. His skin was gray, but it was his lip that caught my attention. It was split, healing, but split, and there was a fading yellow bruise on his jawline. Mr. Sterling, I asked, keeping my eyes locked on the boy, has your client been medically evaluated? No, Your Honor. He refused medical attention at booking. Leo, I asked gently, when was the last time you ate a full meal? Leo's eyes flickered. For a split second, he looked at his mother. It was a reflex, a terrifying reflex of a conditioned animal looking to its master for permission. Elena narrowed her eyes at him, a subtle, microscopic warning glare. Leo swallowed hard and looked back at me. I had a sandwich yesterday, sir. A sandwich, I repeated. You are 19 years old. You should be eating 3 meals a day plus snacks. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Mrs. Vance says she gave you everything. Food, shelter, Why do you look like you're starving? I choose to live this way, Leo stammered, his voice raspy and dry. I, I like fasting. It's a lifestyle choice. A lifestyle choice, I repeated, not believing a word of it. And the bruise on your jaw? Is that a lifestyle choice too? Leo flinched. He raised a hand to touch his face, then quickly dropped it. I fell. I'm clumsy. He gets into fights, Elena interjected smoothly from the gallery. He hangs out with a rough crowd. Thugs. Criminals. That's why he looks like that. That's why he steals. He owes people money. That's why he took the watch. It was a plausible story. It was the story everyone expected. The drug debt. The bad crowd. But it didn't fit the video. It didn't fit the cash left on the dresser. And it certainly didn't fit the terror in Leo's eyes. I decided to test the waters. Bailiff, I said, please bring the defendant a bottle of water and a chair. He looks like he's about to collapse. As the bailiff handed Leo the water, I saw his hands. His sleeves rode up slightly as he reached for the bottle. There were marks, circular burns, small, distinct, and clustered on the inside of his forearm. I had seen marks like that before in abuse cases. Cigarette burns. Roll up your sleeves, Leo, I ordered. The room went dead silent again. Elena Vance shifted in her seat. Objection, the prosecutor said, confused. Your Honor, is this relevant to the theft charge? It is relevant to my sentencing, I snapped. If I am to judge this boy's character, I need to see who he is. Leo, roll up your sleeves. Now, Leo froze. He looked at his mother again, panic rising in his chest. He was hyperventilating. I can't, he whispered. Please, don't make me. Why? I asked. Because she'll be angry, he blurted out. He slapped his hand over his mouth instantly, realizing what he had just said, but it was too late. The words were out. She, not they, not the gang, not the drug dealers, she. I turned my gaze slowly to Elena Vance. She wasn't smirking anymore. Her face had gone rigid, her eyes cold and calculating. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice low and dangerous, we are not accepting a guilty plea today. Not yet, because I suspect that the real crime committed in this house was not the theft of a watch. The air in the courtroom had changed. It was no longer the stale, recycled air of a Tuesday morning docket. It was heavy, charged with the static electricity of a secret being ripped open before it was ready. She'll be angry. Those 3 words hung in the silence like smoke after a gunshot. Elena Vance was on her feet instantly. This is absurd, she shrieked, her composure finally cracking like cheap porcelain. He is obviously delirious. He is on drugs, Your Honor. That is why he is shaking. That is why he is paranoid. He is talking about his dealer. A woman, a female drug lord. I tried to save him from her. It was a good pivot. Quick, calculated. But I wasn't buying it. I looked at Leo. He wasn't looking at a phantom drug dealer. He was looking at the floor, his shoulders hunched so high they almost touched his ears, bracing for a blow that he knew was coming. Sit down, Mrs. Vance, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of the entire judicial system behind it. One more outburst, and I will have you removed. And if you leave this room, your son stays here with me. Alone, where you can't control what he says. That stopped her. The threat of losing control was the only thing that terrified a narcissist. She sat down, smoothing her skirt with aggressive, jerky movements. Her eyes, however, never left the back of Leo's head. Bailiff, I nodded to the officer standing near Leo. Please. The sleeves. The bailiff, a man named Miller who had seen everything from cartel hitmen to weeping grandmothers, approached Leo gently. Son, he said softly, I need you to let go. Leo was gripping his cuffs so hard his fingers were blue. He looked at me, tears finally spilling over his hollow cheeks. Please, he whispered. It's ugly. You don't want to see it. I have to, Leo, I said. I need to know the truth. Slowly, Leo released his grip. Miller rolled up the heavy gray fabric of the hoodie. First, the left arm, then the right. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Even Harrison, the prosecutor who was trying to put this boy in jail 5 minutes ago, covered his mouth with his hand. Leo's arms were a map of torture. They weren't just cigarette burns. There were long, thin welts that wrapped around his forearms, the distinct, undeniable signature of a wire hanger or a riding crop. There were older scars, silver and jagged, layered underneath fresh, angry red ones. But what made my stomach turn was the pattern. On his left wrist, the burns were clustered in a perfect circle, mimicking the shape of a watch. On his right, they formed a bracelet. It wasn't random violence. It was branding. Jesus, Miller whispered, forgetting courtroom protocol. I stood up. I walked down from the bench. I needed to see this up close. I needed to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I stood in front of Leo Vance, a boy who had been painted as a monster by his own mother. I looked at the watch burned into his skin. Who did this? I asked. And don't tell me it was a drug dealer. Dealers break legs to get money. They don't brand you like cattle. Leo didn't answer. He was crying silently, his body shaking so hard the chair rattled against the floor. I turned slowly to face the gallery, to face her. Elena Vance was pale, but her chin was still high. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to look at the mutilated arms of her child. Mrs. Vance, I said, take the stand. I am a victim here, she snapped. I am the witness for the prosecution. You cannot treat me like a suspect. This is a evidentiary hearing to determine the validity of a guilty plea, I countered. I have the authority to question the credibility of the complaining witness. And right now, your credibility is bleeding out on this floor. Take the stand, or I will hold you in contempt, and you will spend the night in a cell next to the thugs you claim your son hangs out with. She moved stiffly, walking to the witness box with the mechanical grace of a robot. She sat down, crossing her legs, adjusting her pearls. She looked at me with pure hatred. You mentioned you gave him everything. I started, leaning against the railing of the jury box, just a few feet from her. Food, shelter. Did you give him these marks too? Of course not, she scoffed. He does that to himself. He is a cutter. He self-harms for attention. I have spent thousands on therapists. They all say he is manipulative. Self-harm, I repeated. He burned a watch onto his own wrist with his non-dominant hand in a perfect circle. He is disturbed, she said coldly. He is obsessed with time. He is obsessed with what he thinks he is owed. Let's talk about what he is owed, I said, or rather, what he owes. Mr. Harrison, please hand me the evidence bag containing the stolen items. The prosecutor handed me the bag. I held up the Rolex. A gold date, heavy, ostentatious. Leo, I called out without looking away from his mother. Why did you take this? You didn't take the cash. You took the watch. Why? Leo wiped his nose on his shoulder. His voice was barely audible. To pay the rent, the courtroom murmured. Rent? I asked. You live in your mother's house. You pay rent? Not normal rent, Leo stammered. The existence tax. I froze. The what? The existence tax, Leo said, his voice gaining a tiny bit of strength now that the truth was leaking out. She charges me. For the room. For the food. For the air. I looked at Elena. She didn't flinch. He is an adult, she said smoothly. He is 19. In the real world, you pay to live. I am teaching him responsibility. I keep a ledger. He owes me for 18 years of upbringing. We agreed he would pay it back. You agreed? I asked, incredulous. Or you forced him? He signed a contract, she said, a smug smile touching her lips. On his 18th birthday, he acknowledged his debt to the family estate, $500,000, covering private school, clothing, medical bills, and room and board. He has to work it off. Work it off how? Chores, errands, and fines, Leo interrupted. Fines for mistakes. I see, I said, the picture finally coming into focus. And the watch? Was that to pay a fine? I broke a vase, Leo whispered. A Ming vase in the hallway. I tripped. I didn't mean to, she said. She said it was worth $30,000. She said she would add it to the ledger. She said the interest would kill me. She said. He choked back a sob. She said if I didn't pay it by Friday, I would go back in the hole. The hole? I asked. The basement, Leo said. The soundproof room, where the bad boys go. Elena laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. He is being dramatic. It's a timeout room, a meditation space. Is that where he got the burns, Mrs. Vance? I asked quietly. In the meditation space? I told you. I don't know where he got those, she shouted. Mr. Sterling. I barked at the public defender. Subpoena the contract, subpoena this ledger, and get Child Protective Services on the phone to pull any records from before he was 18. I want to know if this meditation space has a lock on the outside. Your Honor. Elena stood up, her face twisting into a mask of rage. You are overstepping your bounds. This is a theft trial, he confessed. He is on video. You cannot turn this into a witch hunt against a grieving mother. Grieving? I walked back up to my bench and looked down at her. You aren't grieving, Mrs. Vance. You're collecting. You aren't a mother. You're a loan shark. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life. You brought your victim into a room full of people whose job it is to spot liars. I turned to the bailiff. Mr. Miller, take Mrs. Vance into custody. What? Elena screeched. On what charge? We'll start with child endangerment, since these burns clearly predate his 19th birthday, I said calmly. Then we'll add extortion. And let's throw in false imprisonment for the whole. But right now, I'm holding you in contempt of court for lying to my face about those marks being self-inflicted. You can't do this, she screamed as Miller moved towards her. Do you know who my husband is? Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, I said, picking up my gavel. You are the defendant. The sound of handcuffs clicking onto Elena Vance's wrists didn't sound like justice. It sounded like a dam breaking. As Officer Miller escorted her out, her screams died down into a terrifying silence, her eyes locking onto Leo with a promise of retribution that made my skin crawl. She mouthed, "You did this," right before the heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing her fate for the moment. Leo didn't see her exit because he had curled into a tight ball in his chair, rocking back and forth with his hands over his ears. He wasn't relieved. He was in a state of absolute panic, muttering over and over that she was going to kill him for breaking the rules. I stepped down from the bench and crouched near his table, trying to break through his terror. I told him to look at me, assuring him that she wasn't putting him anywhere and that he was safe. He looked at me with eyes far too old for 19 years and whispered that I didn't understand the debt, explaining that it never went down, only up, and now the legal fees would be added to his tab. I immediately stood up and addressed the courtroom, ordering a recess until 2 p.m. I instructed the prosecutor to execute a search warrant on the Vance residence immediately to find the ledger and document the alleged hole, while also ordering a paramedic to treat the boy's injuries. 3 hours later, the courtroom was packed as word of the Chanel mother case had leaked to social media, but my focus was solely on the thick file folder Detective Miller placed on my bench. Miller, a veteran homicide detective who rarely flinched, looked pale and his hands shook slightly as he handed over the evidence. He told me I needed to see the basement photos first. I opened the folder to see a luxurious wine cellar, but behind a heavy oak rack lay a hidden door leading to a nightmare. It wasn't a room, it was a concrete box, barely 4 feet wide, with no windows, no ventilation, and egg crate foam lining the walls for soundproofing. The back of the door revealed deep, frantic gouges in the wood, and near the bottom, the concrete was stained with dried blood and fingernail marks. Miller testified that they found a bucket in the corner and a timer on the wall set for 48 hours. He explained that a logbook indicated Leo was locked in there for 2 days just for breaking a plate, with a $500 facility usage fee added to his debt. Miller then handed me Exhibit B, a heavy, leather-bound accounting book filled with elegant calligraphy that detailed every expense since Leo's birth. I read entries charging for delivery room fees, diapers, and even an inconvenience fee for crying at night as an infant. The pages documented thousands of entries, including a stupidity tax for a broken arm at age 7 and rent increases for market inflation at age 12. The final total at the bottom, updated just yesterday, showed a debt of over $800,000, with interest compounding daily. I declared that this wasn't a ledger but a slave contract, and Miller revealed there was more. Alongside the contract Leo signed at 18, they found a stack of unopened letters hidden in the safe from Franklin Vance, Leo's father. Elena had claimed he died in a car accident 10 years ago, but Miller confirmed he was alive in Ohio and had been sending child support checks that Elena burned while keeping the letters. I read one where Franklin begged to see his son, revealing that Elena had lied to isolate Leo and force him into indentured servitude under the guise of an inescapable debt. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open, and Elena's high-priced attorney ran in, demanding his client's release and claiming the search was illegal. I closed the ledger with a sound that echoed like a gunshot and told him he was just in time, because I was about to issue a warrant for his arrest. He froze as I held up the contract Leo signed at 18, pointing out his notary stamp on a document that enforced slavery and extortion on a teenager. I asked if he really thought he could bark orders at me after facilitating human trafficking within a domestic household. I ordered the bailiff not to release Mrs. Vance, but to upgrade her to maximum security as a flight risk, and demanded the Ohio State Police be contacted to find Franklin Vance. Turning back to the sweating lawyer, I demanded to know where the rest of the money was, noting the ledger showed Leo had paid off $50,000 by working as an unpaid intern at his firm. I told him to sit down because we were just getting started. Mr. Thorne, the attorney with the $3,000 suit and the morals of a sewer rat, tried to invoke attorney-client privilege, his voice cracking under the pressure. I leaned over the bench and told him that privilege evaporates the moment a lawyer becomes a co-conspirator in a crime. I held up the ledger again, flipping to the section marked External Revenue, and watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. It turned out Leo hadn't just been cleaning his mother's house to pay off his existence tax. For the last 2 years, the ledger showed he had been working 40 hours a week at Thorne's law firm, filing papers and cleaning offices after hours. The ledger indicated that Thorne paid Elena directly $15 an hour, but Leo never saw a single dime. Every cent was deducted from his debt, while Thorne got free labor and Elena pocketed the cash. Thorne was literally renting a human being from his mother. I looked at Thorne and asked if he enjoyed the profits of his modern-day slavery ring. He didn't answer, but the sweat dripping down his temple onto his silk collar said everything I needed to know. I ordered the bailiff to seize his phone and laptop immediately as evidence of human trafficking and labor violations. The look of absolute terror on his face was satisfying, but it didn't fix the broken boy sitting at the defense table, who was still trying to process that his entire reality was a lie. Leo was staring at the stack of charred letters from his father, touching the handwriting like it was a holy relic he wasn't worthy to hold. He whispered that she had told him his father hated him, that his father used to beat him when he was a baby. I looked at the boy and told him that was the only way she could keep him in the cage. If he knew he was loved, her power would have vanished years ago. Abuse thrives in isolation, and she had built a fortress of lies to keep him alone. Just then, the courtroom clerk signaled me. The screen descended from the ceiling. We hadn't been able to get Franklin Vance to the courthouse in person yet, but the Ohio State Police had tracked him down and put him on a secure video link from Columbus. When the monitor flickered to life, revealing the face of a man who looked exactly like an older, healthier version of Leo, the sound Leo made wasn't a word. It was a sob that sounded like something ripping inside his chest. Franklin Vance was crying before he even spoke, pressing his hand against the camera lens as if trying to reach through the screen. He explained that he had hired private investigators for a decade, but they always hit dead ends. Elena hadn't just hidden Leo physically, she had changed his social security number and legally altered his middle name to hide him from the system. She had buried him alive in bureaucracy just like she buried him in that basement. Franklin's eyes then drifted to the evidence bag sitting on my desk. He squinted at the monitor and asked to see the watch Leo was accused of stealing. I put on a pair of gloves and held the gold Rolex up to the camera. Franklin gasped, his face twisting in fresh pain, and said that watch wasn't Elena's property. He told the court he had bought that watch for Leo on the day he was born, to be held in trust until he turned 18. I turned the watch over, realizing I hadn't checked the back before because I was so focused on the burns on Leo's arms. There, in tiny, elegant script on the gold casing, were the words, "To Leo, time is yours. Love, Dad." The courtroom went deadly silent as the cruelty of the situation sank in. Leo hadn't stolen his mother's property. He had reclaimed his own birthright. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Elena hadn't just branded him with the shape of a watch to punish him. She had branded him with the specific object that represented his father's love, turning a gift of freedom into a mark of ownership. I looked at Leo, who was weeping silently while clutching the letters, and I knew that simply dismissing the charges wasn't enough. I needed to burn Elena Vance's world to the ground, and I was going to use her own ledger to light the match. The inscription on the back of the watch changed the entire gravitational pull of the room. To Leo, time is yours. It wasn't just a gift. It was a prophecy that Elena had tried to burn out of existence. I looked at the burn on Leo's wrist again, and then at the gold casing in my hand. The shape matched perfectly. She hadn't used a random heated object. She had heated this specific watch, the symbol of his father's love, and branded him with it like livestock. It was a level of psychological cruelty that made the physical abuse seem almost secondary. I turned my gaze to Mr. Thorne, the lawyer who was currently trying to make himself invisible behind his defense table. I asked him if he knew about the watch's origin when he filed the theft charges. He stammered, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, claiming he only knew what his client told him. I slammed the ledger down on the bench, the sound making him jump. I pointed out that his firm had billed Leo for asset recovery services regarding this specific watch 3 years ago, according to page 204. He knew exactly who bought it because his firm handled the trust. I didn't wait for his excuse. I turned to the court stenographer and ordered the record to reflect that the charges against Leo Vance were dismissed with extreme prejudice. I declared that a person cannot steal their own property, and since the watch was a gift held in trust, Leo had simply taken possession of what was legally his. The theft charge evaporated instantly, but the silence in the room was heavy because everyone knew the real trial was just beginning. Leo didn't cheer. He didn't even smile. He just slumped forward, clutching the watch to his chest as if it were a life raft in the middle of an ocean. He looked at the screen where his father was weeping and asked a question that broke my heart. He whispered, "Does this mean the debt is gone? Or do I still have to pay for the lawyer?" He was so conditioned, so thoroughly broken, that even in the face of absolute vindication, his mind couldn't escape the ledger. I stepped down from the bench again, ignoring the protocol because some moments require humanity more than procedure. I walked over to Leo and put a hand on his shoulder. I told him that the debt was a lie. I told him that the ledger was evidence of a crime, not a contract. I told him that he didn't owe anyone anything, and that for the first time in 19 years, his time actually belonged to him. Then, I turned back to Mr. Thorne. I told him he had a choice to make right now. He could go down for conspiracy, human trafficking, and fraud alongside Elena, or he could start talking. I wanted to know where the rest of the money went. I wanted to know about the consulting fees listed in the ledger that went to judges and social workers who had ignored Franklin's attempts to find his son. Thorne looked at the door where the bailiffs were standing, then at me. He cracked. He started spilling everything, right there on the record. He admitted that Elena had liquidated Franklin's assets using forged death certificates. He admitted that the hole in the basement was his idea to keep Leo compliant. He admitted that they had bribed a corrupt social worker to falsify home visit reports when Leo was 10. As Thorne confessed, the doors opened again, and this time it wasn't a lawyer. It was the FBI. Agent Miller had called them the moment he saw the ledger. They walked in, silent and terrifyingly professional, and handcuffed Thorne mid-sentence. I watched as the man who had profited from a boy's slavery was dragged out, his expensive suit now looking like a costume for a role he could no longer play. I looked back at the screen. Franklin Vance was wiping his eyes. He asked if he could come get his son. I told him to get in his car and drive, and that I would personally ensure Leo was in protective custody until he arrived. But then Leo stood up. He looked at the empty doorway where his mother had been taken, then at the ledger on my desk. He asked if he could do one thing before he left. Leo approached the bench slowly, his movements no longer resembling those of a terrified animal, but of a survivor stepping out of the wreckage. He didn't ask to destroy the ledger. He didn't ask to burn it. He asked for a pen. Not just any pen. He pointed to the thick red marker I used for denying motions. I handed it to him. curious to see what a boy who had been conditioned to fear ink and paper would do with the ultimate tool of authority. He opened the heavy book to the final page, the one that claimed he owed his mother nearly $1 million for the crime of existing. The courtroom held its breath. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, Leo didn't scribble or tear the page. He drew a single, thick, red line through the total sum. Then, underneath it, in block letters that took up half the page, he wrote one word: void. He closed the book. The thud it made against the wood of my bench sounded like a prison door slamming shut, but this time, he was on the outside. He looked up at me and said, "It's not a contract if it's coerced, Your Honor." "Isn't that what you said?" "That is exactly what I said, Leo," I replied. He turned to the screen where his father was watching. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time since the truth came out. "I'm ready to go home. I don't have any stuff. I left it all behind." Franklin Vance leaned into the camera, tears streaming down his face. "You don't need any of it, Leo. We'll get new stuff. We'll get a whole new life. I'm in the car. I'm driving right now. Just stay safe." "I will," Leo said. Then he looked at the bailiff. "Can I have that sandwich now?" I ordered the bailiffs to escort Leo to my private chambers, not a holding cell. I wanted him eating real food, sitting on a comfortable couch, watching cartoons or sports or whatever 19-year-olds did when they weren't being tortured. As he walked out, a strange thing happened. The people in the gallery, strangers, court clerks, even the stenographer, stood up. It wasn't a cheer. It was a silent standing ovation for a boy who had walked through hell and come out the other side holding his head up. But the case wasn't over for me. As the courtroom cleared, Detective Miller came back in through the side door. He wasn't carrying a file this time. He was holding an evidence bag containing the contents of Elena Vance's purse, which had been seized when she was taken into custody. "Judge," Miller said, his voice grim, "you were right to deny bail. You have no idea how close we cut this." He placed a travel document on my bench. It wasn't just a passport. It was a fake passport for Leo, but the photo wasn't recent. It was from when he was 15, making him look younger, more vulnerable. And tucked inside was a boarding pass. "Switzerland," Miller said. "One way. Departing tonight at 11 p.m. "She was fleeing?" I asked. "Not just fleeing," Miller corrected. "She was relocating the asset. We found emails on her phone to a wellness clinic in the Swiss Alps. It's a facility that specializes in behavioral correction for the children of the ultra-wealthy. It's basically a high-end prison where you pay to have your kids lobotomized by drugs in isolation." My blood ran cold. The hole in the basement wasn't the end game. It was the training ground. She knew Leo was turning 20. She knew he was getting too big, too aware, perhaps too hard to control with just a ledger. She wasn't planning to let him work off the debt. She was planning to disappear him into a black site where no American judge could ever reach him. She wasn't suing him to get the money, I realized, the horror of her plan finally clicking into place. She brought him to court to legitimize her control. She wanted a court order mandating he pay her back so she could use it as leverage to force him onto that plane. "Come with me to the clinic to work off your debt, or go to federal prison for theft." "Exactly," Miller said. "She was weaponizing you, Judge. She wanted you to be the one to hand him over." I looked at the fake passport, then at the empty chair where Elena Vance had sat, radiating arrogance and Chanel perfume. She had played the grieving mother, the strict disciplinarian, the victim, but she was none of those things. She was a predator who had almost used my gavel as a murder weapon against her own son's future. "Add kidnapping to the charges," I told Miller, "and conspiracy to commit international human trafficking. And Miller, make sure she knows. Make sure she knows we found the ticket. I want her to know that her perfect escape plan is the reason she's going to die in a concrete box, just like the one she built for him." When Detective Miller told Elena Vance about the discovery of the passport and the one-way ticket to Switzerland, she didn't scream. She didn't threaten to sue. She simply stared at the concrete wall of her holding cell, the realization finally sinking in that her intricate web of control had snapped. The woman who had treated her son like a line item in a ledger was now just a number in the federal system. Her arrogance evaporated. leaving behind only the hollow shell of a person who had tried to play God with a child's life and lost. An hour later, a commotion in the hallway signaled the arrival I had been waiting for. The door to my chambers burst open, and Franklin Vance stumbled in. He looked like he had run all the way from Ohio. He was breathless, his eyes wild with a mixture of hope and terror. When he saw Leo sitting on the couch, holding a half-eaten sandwich and staring at the floor, Franklin stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't rush him. He didn't shout. He just whispered, "Leo?" Leo looked up. For a moment, he didn't move. He scanned his father's face, searching for the monster his mother had described for a decade. But he didn't find one. He found his own eyes staring back at him, filled with tears. Leo stood up, the blanket slipping off his shoulders, and took a hesitant step forward. "Dad?" he choked out. "Is it real?" Franklin closed the distance in 2 strides and enveloped his son in a hug that seemed to hold 10 years of missing birthdays and stolen moments. Leo collapsed into him, sobbing into his father's coat, finally letting go of the weight he had carried in that basement. Watching them, I realized that this was the only verdict that mattered. The law could punish Elena, but only love could heal Leo. The aftermath of the case was swift and brutal for the conspirators. Elena Vance was denied bail, deemed a severe flight risk due to the Swiss ticket. The federal prosecutors didn't just charge her with fraud, they threw the book at her for human trafficking and kidnapping. She eventually pled guilty to avoid a life sentence, accepting 30 years in federal prison. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who locked her son in a basement for 48 hours would now spend the rest of her life in a cage, controlled by guards, eating when she was told, and sleeping when the lights went out. Mr. Thorne, the lawyer who facilitated the slavery contract, turned state's evidence against Elena to save his own skin. But it wasn't enough to save his career. He was disbarred permanently and sentenced to 8 years for fraud and conspiracy. His firm was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to Leo. The existence tax he had helped enforce became the very thing that bankrupted him. As for Leo, he didn't just survive, he thrived. With his father's help, he moved to Ohio. He started therapy, real therapy, not the gaslighting sessions his mother had paid for. The last update I received from Franklin included a photo. It was Leo, looking healthy, having gained weight, smiling next to a new car. On his wrist, he wasn't wearing the Rolex. He had sold it. He used the money to pay for his first year of college, where he was studying social work to help kids who were trapped in invisible prisons just like he had been. Before he left my courtroom that day, Leo asked me one final question. He pointed to the ledger I still had on my desk, the book of debts, fines, and cruelty. He asked, "What happens to the book?" I picked it up, feeling the weight of the misery recorded inside. I told him, "This stays with me. It goes into the permanent evidence archive. It will never be opened again. It is closed. Just like that chapter of your life." I share this story because it forces us to look at the definitions we take for granted. We assume mother means protector. We assume home means safety. But sometimes the most dangerous people aren't lurking in alleyways. They are sitting at the head of the dinner table, keeping score. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It is about validating the victim's reality. It is about looking at a boy who believes he owes the world for his existence and telling him, "You are free. You don't owe anyone for the air you breathe." Leo Vance walked into my courtroom a slave to a lie. He walked out a free man, reclaiming the time that had been stolen from him. If this story moved you, if you believe that every child deserves to be loved and not tallied, share this video. Let's remind the world that true family isn't about blood or contracts. It's about who shows up when the walls are closing in. Thank you for watching. Remember, in this courtroom and in life, character is the only currency that matters. And unlike Elena Vance's ledger, kindness leaves a mark that never fades. I'll see you in the next case.